about his newest book. So he has pre-signed the copies that we have here in the store, and then he will be happy to personalize after the event. And I'm going to hand it over to his audiobook reader, Scott Brick.
Hey there. So I'm not going to blow smoke up Gregg's ass because he doesn't need me to, but people ask me all the time what's my favorite series to work on, and I always say Orphan X.
Yay.
It just is. People ask me why, and I say it's because it always surprises me. And it's a delight. It's like a paid vacation. Please don't tell the publisher this, but I would do them for free. Please don't tell them that. I like getting paid. But in the meantime, it is a truly a great honor to be able to introduce my friend and my favorite author, Gregg Hurwitz. So, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
What the hell happened to your finger?
So I do a lot of very daring research for the Orphan X books. And one of two things happened that injured this finger. One is it got stuck in the ejection port of a Benelli combat shotgun, or I dislocated it tucking in my shirt. I'm not sure which one we're gonna lead with, but since it's just you and me talking, I think we're gonna go with the latter. Yeah, I was tucked in my shirt, I pulled it out, and my top knuckle was at a 45-degree angle. And then I bent it back and it snapped back. It's what's called mallet finger, and then it was dropped here. And then, of course, I was doing a show at the time this happened, and I was on air, so we had hair and makeup, and I asked him to cut a nail file, and I just taped it to this. And one of my college roommates is an ER doc now, and I sent him pictures, right? Like, this is fine, right? And so he calls me right before I walk on set. He goes, look, dude, you're not a fucking cobbler from the 17th century. Like, get to a hospital. It's the middle finger of your dominant hand. And so I've had this giant finger canoe for all of my tours, and all the signing and all the handshaking and all the everything. So.
How long have you been on tour? It was 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, I've been traveling for about 5 weeks. I've been on tour the last 2 weeks. It came out on Valentine's Day, which is why I went on tour before coming here, because I figured you all might have some other romance in your life, even greater than Evan Smoke, that you might want to attend to on February 14th.
That's very considerate of you. I've got a couple of questions I always look forward to being able to ask of Gregg. By way of background, I get asked a lot when people ask me, what should I be listening to? And they tell me that their favorite genre is the mystery thriller genre, and I always say Orphan X, and they say, well, how is it unique? And what I always talk about is how the main character, Evan Smoke, is so tactical. I mean, even when he's getting on or off an elevator, he is looking for points of ingress or egress. And we've all been on elevators, and we know there's typically only one. It's the door. It's in or out. But Evan knows there's also the ceiling, if you have to. But I was listening to a podcast that you did that debuted this week. It was the Drinking Brothers podcast.
Yeah,
I think is that the name of it?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was very funny, and Gregg described the character in a different way, and I think from now on I'm going to use his description. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said, Evan is uncomfortable with the awkward language of intimacy. That he could garrote a child molester in Russia without breaking a sweat, but he comes undone if he has to make small talk at his mailbox. And when you put both of them, my version of the character, the way that I would describe him, and his version, when you put that together, it's a unique pairing. And I've just always been curious, where the hell did this guy come from? And having done like 10 or 12 standalone novels before that, what was it about him that made you think, I can't cover this all in just one volume?
So I was really afraid to start writing Orphan X. I had the notion of it, And I kept writing another book first, and another book first, and another book first. Because on the surface of it, if you take kids out of, foster homes who are orphans and train them up to be expendable weapons, that's not a wildly innovative initial concept unless there's a lot of depth and texture around it. David Morrell has swam in those waters. Of course, we have La Femme Nikita. And so I had to keep thinking of all the things that would differentiate this character. And so it took me 4 books really to do that, to really think about, everything's got to come back to character. If you stop somebody on the street and you ask them what their favorite action scene is from James Bond, they'll hesitate a moment. But we all know how he takes his martini, right? And so the aim is how you have everything feel like an Evan Smoke action scene, not a Bourne action scene, right? Not something else. And so one of the things I arrived at early was to have it be that he's an archetypal character, but he lives in the real world where you and I live. And that was one of the things that for me was sort of I realized that I had to kind of angle in on the character that could be really different. So he goes out and he might get in a knife fight and be bleeding out through his sleeve. Then he goes on the elevator and he's stuck with like the annoying elderly Jewish woman who lives downstairs from him, who may or may not be based on my grandmother, and gets pulled into like some HOA meeting that they're voting on the carpet for the lobby as he's getting death threats on his phone from a cartel member. So that modulation between the two, and the fact that based on his upbringing, right, pulled out of a foster home from the age of 12, trained in a silo to be basically an expendable weapon, he never learned to speak the strange language of intimacy. He doesn't understand that, but he wants to. And so one of the things that's increasingly come to the fore for me as I've thought about the series is it's like he's Pinocchio, but he wants to be a real boy. And one thing that's very interesting, I started this book, I was right on the cusp of 40 when I started writing it. And I didn't think about this. For me creatively, things only make sense looking back. I can't write from an abstraction down or a theme down. But basically, we don't meet Evan in Orphan X when he's in the foster home, when he's recruited out, when he's trained, when he has his first missions, right? When he leaves the program, when he goes off the radar, when the program's chasing him. We meet him basically when he's on his first mission, or the first mission that he does is a pro bono assassin. At the point where he's gone out so that it's aligned with his own moral compass, and the first mission finds him breaking all 10 of the assassin's commandments, the rules that govern his life, the black and white rules that he's always lived by, suddenly shatter into more than 50 Shades of Grey. And so it's really weird to start a series at this point of unraveling almost, but it's not just the action series that we're reading for the action, it's really about his process of becoming a human. And so it makes sense in hindsight why it started at that moment, and then I fed kind of bits and pieces back as the series has evolved.
I think my favorite thing about the series are the supporting characters. Well, I mean, you know who my favorite character is. My favorite character is Tommy Stojak, his armorer. But there's always a victim, for lack of a better word, who through Evan's help winds up realizing they don't have to be a victim anymore. They become empowered. And what's amazing to me is the way that you use their brokenness, for lack of a better term. I'm thinking specifically, as I speak about this, of Trayvon, who I think was in book 4, is still the one that it kicks me in the feels every time he's mentioned, because he's mentally challenged and his family is slaughtered and he is completely incapable of handling this. And there's a moment where yes, he reaches out to Evan for help, but there's a moment where he needs his physical personal help too. Can you sleep? Can you stay here until I fall asleep? And Evan's like, yeah, that's not my thing. And yet Evan learns how to be a real boy. Through the way that Trayvon is broken, Evan gets to fix himself. At what point in the evolution of this series did you realize that was that always the plan? That you were going to do that? Or did you realize somewhere along the line that you wanted to do this?
Well, every mission is like him getting some small piece of his soul back, right? And what constitutes narrative? It's not when bad things happen to good people, because that's not narrative. That's just life. That's pancreatic cancer or an Acme safe that falls on your head, right? And so there's got to be something that's internal to character, right, that opens the door to unforeseen consequences. There's got to be something in the story that's happening that are keys that fit in the locks of Evan's heart and that are opening up places that he doesn't want to go. And for him, he's constantly reflecting on the lack of courage that he has around relationship, right, and around community, and his inability to engage with that. And so a lot of times, you know, I think of him, I've said before, it's like he's got his face up to the aquarium glass, right? He lives in his penthouse on the Wilshire corridor, and he looks out and he's got this dull section view, and there's like, you know, a young couple teaching their toddler baby to walk, and there's an elderly couple practicing waltz, and there's a husband, you know, cooking, and a wife's on the phone in the other room, and he can see all this humanity, and he can't ever be part of that. He can't ever have a life that's like that, but he's a wolf who was trained to hunt other wolves, and what he can do is protect for those people the kind of life that he himself can never have. And so in the process of that, every story's got to have something that's internal to him that he's up against, and it's why they've veered very much into the personal, because that's what we read about. We don't read just for the action sequences and the fight sequences, though those are really goddamn fun.
So I had something happen about 2 months ago, and we haven't spoken since then, so this is the first time I'm sharing it. Suzanne and I and dear friends Hillary and Vikas, we were all at a wedding of audiobook narrators, and one of whom, the groom, is Jeffrey Kafer, and he had a firm rule: there is no talking shop. Because again, you know, he's a narrator, and he's like, we're not talking shop this weekend. We're not talking shop on the day I get married. And I'm like, no, yeah, totally. I just nodded. I nodded, and I said, by the way, I'm working on the latest Orphan X book right now. And he's like, okay, rule suspended.
Can you imagine the toasts at that wedding? Every time when Scott reads, if he's at an event, like I'll be, because we've done different conversations, and I always feel like he finishes reading. First of all, whenever he's sitting in the audience, if he's at an event, everyone's kind of turning around if he talks to listen for like the honey-hued stylings of Scott Brick. But whenever he gets up, then I get up to read, I always feel like I'm like, then Evan went to the store. So I can only imagine at an audiobook narrator wedding, it must have been rather pristine.
Everybody in the audience sounded wonderful. But it really went, it was actually a lesson for me. It's like sometimes the rules don't apply. You know, the most important thing is great storytelling. And the best laid plans, you know, no talking shop today. And I even told him, I couched it like, you know, oh, I'm not talking shop. I'm not talking about how I'm narrating The Last Orphan, but I'm reading it, and oh my God, you're going to love it. And it's amazing to me how often I hear from Orphan X fans, this series has really struck a chord with people. Let me ask you this, compared to your, I know you love every book that you've ever done, they're like your children, and yet how is the response to Orphan X different from, say, your standalone titles?
It's a completely different world. When you have a series character and people returning to that and are engaged with that, I mean, my dear friend Robert Crace is here. He's been writing the Elvis Cole, Joe Pike books. I always throw Joe Pike in as equal billing from the beginning, but I mean, he's been writing them forever, and people, when you have a series that's long running, people return to it with a different kind of relationship. And I'm finding there's so much more to play with. You know, and in this one, I wanted to do some stuff really different with The Last Orphan. It's the 8th one in the series. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is this sort of basis of what could open up Evan to a different kind of trauma, that could open up different parts of his past than even the ones that we've seen. And so, you know, you see all the time on flap copy or trailers that say, and then his past caught up to him. And in this case, it's not that his past catches up to him, it's that it overtakes him, right? It binds him, gags him, hauls him before no less of a presence than the President of the United States. And so the premise of this book is that the President of the United States, with whom he has a sort of informal pardon, they can't quite catch him. He had some activity that helped put her in office because he had a disagreement with her predecessor, who was the President of the United States, that did not go well for that President of the United States. But basically, she's up against somebody who will be familiar from recent news cycles, who is a highly manipulative, incredibly powerful billionaire, right? And essentially, he's so powerful, he's like his own nation state, right? We're at a point now that billionaires are as powerful in some ways as the United States government. And what he does is he lives in the Hamptons on Billionaires Row, and he has these giant Gatsby-esque parties, and he invites the heads of like media moguls, right? Supreme Court justices, key influential senators, key actors and athletes, and he puts every single sin on display in all these rooms. He just serves them up on a platter, and they can partake of whatever they want, but he's got cameras hidden all throughout the mansion. And basically, his little black book is unbelievably powerful, to the extent now with his ability to extort or manipulate, or, you know, all you need right now is 2 votes in the Senate, right? And so the president views him as an incredible threat, and there's nobody who could sort of penetrate his level of security, 1, and 2, take him out while leaving no fingerprints, except the greatest assassin who's ever emerged from this black program buried beneath the DoD, that's Orphan X. So she sends out this massive manhunt after him, and he's taken and brought in, and basically he's given a choice, because when he left the program, he said, I'm never dealing with that abstract world of politics. Like, it's so dirty, it's so corrupt. Everything for him comes down to, like, is there one person suffering who's been being terrorized at the hands of somebody else? And so he's got a choice. It's either your life or your code, unless he can figure out the third way, and that's the way of the orphan, and that's what the book is about.
Yeah. I remember 2 volumes ago, here at Diesel Bookstore, at this same event 2 years ago. It was, of course I've forgotten the name of the book, but it was the book where he had to confront a corrupt president. And Gregg made a number of jokes about, oh my God, every single Google search I've done in the last 3 months is going to get an FBI file started on it.
It was literally like, hotel with best balcony view to White House. Like, those were my Google searches.
Right. So. It's like, you know, you need it, but you don't want the aftermath. I'm curious. You really stepped up the the tech info. I don't want to give anything away. I'm trying to walk around it. There's some restrainment information that came up that and some tactical thinking about how could you possibly get out of this. And I just want to know, how the hell? How the hell? I mean, who are your resources, and are you still generating that FBI?
I have a great Rolodex, man. I mean, I got former spies, I got SEALs, I got one of the world's preeminent demolition breachers. I mean, so I have some good conversations in different quarters. You know, it was interesting for this billionaire. One little side thing that was cool was I wanted to figure out how somebody could have that much influence but not be too overtly and obviously legally corrupt, right? Because if he's just extorting everybody, that's going to flip over. And so I was thinking a lot about Jeffrey Epstein, right? And the depth and reach, like the tentacles of his depravity and connection and influence were so unbelievably deep. I was like, well, how did that guy do it? When I discovered that he did, which is a template I use for Luke Devine, who we can talk about in just a moment before we move to, perhaps you'll read with me.
I would love that.
But one of the things that Epstein did is he'd get somebody on something, but rather than taking money or making an ask, he'd say, look, just put $100 million in my hedge fund, right? And I'll take my 2% and 20% on it, right? And just invest it in the market. It all looks legal. Everybody makes money. He makes hedge fund money with all this huge amounts of money that are stacked. And there's no reason for any sort of trail. And everybody just goes on their merry way and makes money. And he's got his fingerprints are clear and he's just running a hedge fund. And so that's what Luke Devine did.
Yeah.
And Luke, I will say, he's a very different kind of villain than I've written about. There's no question that Evan could beat him every which way physically. Knife fight, hand-to-hand combat, weaponry. He represents no kind of physical threat. But he's an unbelievable master manipulator, psychologically. And so as Evan and him begin this kind of cat and mouse dance that constitutes the bulk of the book, one of the things Evan discovers is a young man and a young woman died at one of these Gatsby-esque parties. And he's saying to Devine, right, if you had anything to do with that, I'm going to put you in the ground. Right, because he's trying to make sure that it's aligned. All he cares about, it's not politics, it's not power, It's not the votes in the Senate. It's not the Supreme Court. It's one young man and one young woman, and if you had anything to do with it. And Luke Devine, for me, represents the intellect. So Milton's Paradise Lost, Milton's Lucifer represents the intellect that falls in love with itself, right? That convinces itself that of anything. It can have all the words right, but it's detached from good, right? It's detached from a moral bearing. It's detached from common sense. So there's this really interesting dialogue and dance between Evan and Luke Devine in this there was a really different sort of thing, because he's trying to get into Evan, and his argument to Evan is, I do what you do down on the street, I just do it up here. And can you even imagine if we teamed up what we could accomplish? Yeah. And so it's a much more psychological book in those regards. Should we read something? Or do you have another?
I would love to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a scene where Evan first gets home from, and he's starting to come undone. You know, he's got his 10 Assassin's Commandments. The most popular one is how you do anything is how you do everything, which like soldiers are getting in tattoos, and it's been like designed. People have jewelry made up of it. They're using it in like C-suite lectures and corporations. It's kind of cool. It's taken on a life of its own. But of course, how you do anything is how you do everything, of course, can turn into a perfectionist speed loop, which can turn into OCD. And he's got a flirtation with OCD, right? And so this is him first getting home from this giant takedown, and he's sort of coming apart in a different way than we've ever seen him. And in fact, it's in a way that takes him all the way back in different ways. So.
We're going to do a lightning round, some questions from the audience, and we would love to have Natalie come up and join us.
So, there's a reason why my daughter is coming up now. Thank you, Scott.
Of course.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Blake. So, there's a joke in the 3rd chapter of this book where Peter, who's the kind of adorable yet mouthy 8-year-old boy, tells Evan, he's asking Evan different questions, and he says, did you ever think about the fact that if your butt crack was horizontal, that it would clap if you went up the stairs? And for some reason, that line has resonated deeply with the reading public. A guy showed up in my book tour in Dallas with a T-shirt that said "The Butt Clappers." It was like a band flyer. And so everyone says, "Well, where did you get that?" And I said, "Look, a lot of his lines I have saved over the years from my daughter." And so I figured there's so many other things that I would rather be proud of you about, but instead, this is what I have, people. And so because Natalie's voice is in there often with both Peter and at times with Joey. Nat thought that we could have her come up here and ask me a lightning round, but this can't be anything too personal, or else you're grounded.
Hello. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I think I'm ready.
Okay. I hope so. What's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Mint chocolate chip.
Favorite movie?
Tony Scott's Man on Fire.
Second favorite dog breed?
Oh no! Oh, really? At 2, Brutus? Great Dane.
Good answer. If you weren't an author, what would your job be?
Second baseman for the Boston Red Sox.
Least favorite word?
Moist. Moist is a terrible, that's never good. You don't want like a moist dish at a restaurant. You don't, it's never good. It never leads to anything positive.
Favorite sound?
You laughing when you were newborn. Your Santa Claus belly laugh.
Oh, get ready, okay?
Uh-oh.
What book are you ashamed you haven't read?
War and Peace. Never read War and Peace. For years it was Moby Dick, and about 10 years ago I read Moby Dick and loved it. Because I was super partial to Hawthorne over Melville. I found Melville really cold. But who here has read War and Peace? All right, well the rest of you quit judging me then.
All right, final question. If you could play in any band, which would it be and what instrument?
Cowbell. No, I would. I mean, how could you not want to play in the Beatles? And how could you not want to be a drummer? That's my estimation. So, all right. Are there any slightly less personal questions? Yes.
I actually have two. The first one's short, so I feel kind of entitled to the second one. The first one is, is it imperative that we read, or in my case, listen to your books in order?
No. Every book resets and is a point of entry. So if you're a series reader and you love series, you can start at the beginning, and there's Easter eggs and there's arcs that move throughout. But I make sure in every one to reset, because each book, ideally, and which has been positive, has new people coming in. So I always make sure it's a good entry point.
Thank you. Number two, how do you know? Do you know when you're done with Evan? Do you know that already?
No, I don't. I do know that the first 10 books are going to form a kind of volume to them. And after that, things are going to be different.
Because it must be hard, you know? You don't want to let go of something that's...
No. Well, it's still... He's still talking to me.
That was a comment, not a question.
The right ways. So, yeah, and it's weird, because there's something that... one of my favorite quotations about writing is from Joan Didion. She said, "I write so I know what I think." And in this character, and I think this was part of me taking 4 years to think it through a lot, there's enough there for me that there's so much that I'm figuring out when I'm writing the books, and I can't think of, because the books come when I'm writing well. I'm writing from my gut. I'm not writing from my cerebral cortex, right? It's like what Evan's saying to Luke Devine, the villain in this one. I don't write from theme down. I don't think, oh, I want to write a book about trauma. I want to write a book about loss. I think in scenes. I think in character. I think in bits and pieces sort of connect, and it keeps happening for me in ways around this sandbox with these characters that I've set up, and so I can't imagine letting go of that anytime soon.
I think your fans are happy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Scott Breck.
Following up on her question, Greg and I are both members of a Facebook group called Orphan X, Do You Need My Help? It's a number of fans worldwide. And everybody has been sending me private messages saying, this book is called The Last Orphan.
Yeah.
Is it going to be the last book? So thank you for answering that. There will be at least 2 more. But even if it's different after 10, do you see it progressing past that? Just so I can answer the question.
And so you can make,
Yeah, so I can keep having fun.
Scott Brick, by the way, I put in my contract, quick Scott Brick story. So, 1-855 to nowhere. If you call it, Orphan X answers the phone, right?
I've called it. I've called it.
You've called it. And the voice of Evan spoke for me before I sold the manuscript. I knew it was going to be Scott. I'd worked with Scott since The Crime Writer was our first in 2008. And I went over to his house with the manuscript because he's got his own sound booth because he's Scott Brick. And I said, man, when I submit this to editors, some people are going to probably call the number, and I want to have Orphan X answer the phone. Will you do it for me? He's like, man, that sounds fun. And when I sold it, I have literally in my contracts, for every contract that I have, that it has to be Scott Brick. And when I switched audio publishers, that was one of the deal points for me. And by the way, everyone's delighted about it. It's not like I have to twist arms. But it's been a very important part of it. So yeah, people were very concerned about The Last Orphan. I would say even were it not full steam ahead for me creatively, it would be a poor financial decision for me to retire Evan Smoke. But that's not why I'm keeping him around, because I can't ever do jobs for that reason. But yeah, you put last in a title, and next thing you know, everyone's mad at you, and everyone's calling your audiobook reader. So he'll be around. He's gonna be around a while. Any other questions? Well, yes.
Is there a status on this TV deal or whatever with all your standalone books?
Oh, yeah. Yes, we have. So I did a deal for 8 of my, I call them my Hitchcock Everyman thrillers. I call this series the Mark Mann series. And I set them up as a group over at Paramount Plus, and I'm going to be co-producing with Scott Frank. He's my favorite adapter, screenwriter who does adaptations. He did Minority Report. He did Philip K. Dick. He did Walk Among the Tombstones, which is Lawrence Block. He did Get Shorty, which is Elmore Leonard, and he's done a dozen. He wrote and directed Queen's Gambit, which is my favorite stretch of TV in memory, maybe. And so I had a chance to do that with him. And what we're going to do is take my stories, and then we will produce and work with kind of younger, up-and-coming writers from kind of different backgrounds. It's so goddamn hard to break in now. It's just impossible. And to try and give some stability, like to give a lot of support to it. So the first one's going to be The Survivor. We have an amazing writer who's going to be his directing debut. His name is Nick Jones Jr., former Marine, because The Survivor deals with PTSD, and we've been working with him, and that's been pretty cool. And he's off to a solid start, and we're looking at what the next book is going to be. Survivor, I always thought would be the first one.
Do you get final control if they try to like change everything to make it?
You never. So the control you have as the writer novelist is who you choose to partner with and how you choose to partner with them. And so I have a very good relationship with Scott. But no, I can't in the 11th hour. I mean, unless you're Stephen King, it's just you don't have that level. But the thing is what we're looking for, because we're having kind of extensive interviews. We had a ton of submissions, and we're really narrowing it down. And what you really want when someone's adapting your work is that you talk to them and they know the DNA and they love the story and they get the story. And then you have to hand it over and they have to make it theirs, right? And so I'm there for him, but he's changing it. He's making it his own, but he really, really understands and loves the story and kind of blew us out of the water with his presentation. And so when you get to that point, you know, you want to be in a positive feedback loop with everybody. Yes?
I saw a comment on the Facebook group about Joey and Peter not really aging very much, and that made me wonder, how far apart are X's missions? How far apart are the calls to his roam zone?
Well, a lot of them have gone kind of back to back, because what I do is I close off each story, and then often I'll like turn a card over at the end. That's like not really cliffhanger, but an opening to what's next. What's really interesting is, in hindsight, I think I realized that some of that aesthetic is what like streaming TV does, right? Where you get to the end of a season and then there's some big thing that promises what's next. So that's compressed the timeline a little bit on the stories. But I actually called, I mentioned my dear friend Robert Crace, and I was like, dude, I don't want to age everybody up this fast, right? And Bob has an answer when he talks about Elvis called Joe Pike. He's like, they don't age like you and me, right? They just don't. They age how they want to age. So Joey has a birthday that comes. Like, they're going to get older, but I'm not running them that they're getting older a year for every book, or Joey'd be in her mid-20s, and I don't want her in her mid-20s. I like her at 17 right now. I let her move from 16 to 17, but kids today, they just want to grow up so fast. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, so the books I think are signed, but I can get back behind the counter and personalize them if anybody would like that. And thank you all for coming, and thank you, Scott Brick, and thank you, Natalie.